Hi, I'm Fax, and I made a Unity package for VRChat which gives you analytics for your VRChat worlds. It basically lets you track what players do in your world exactly. For example, if there's a certain spot they like to hang out in, or if they have a tendency to fall off the map. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of how to use the package, though the package does come with a ReadMe PDF file, so you can refer to that if you have any questions, or just ask me on Discord. The package requires the VRChat SDK 3, so Udon. It also requires Merlin's Udon Sharp, and that's about it. I have a blank scene here, and let's say this is my VRChat world, and I'd like to know where players like to spend time inside my world. And I have, for example, one plane right here, and I have one that is slightly offset like this. And I want to know how much time people spend on this weird square. Alright, here we go. Fax Analytics comes with a couple of prefabs, so you can get started right away. And the only two prefabs you'll need for this task are the Analytics Manager and the Area Analytics prefab. I'll just drag both of these into the scene. Now, the Area Analytics is what we use to track where players are. And as you can see, I can simply move this into place, rotate it a bit, and I'll just get it roughly into the position for the tutorial. Here we go, that's good enough. And as you can see, these Area Analytics have two different parameters. We have a URL, which is how we track where players are and how we send it to the server. And we have a trigger, which is what we use to check where players are inside the world. You can leave this empty. That just means that it's going to trigger automatically whenever a player joins, if that's what you want. You can also change the trigger to whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a box collider. Just make sure that isTrigger is checked. And you might have to change the layer to something like post-processing from default to make sure it doesn't conflict with any of your other layers. Now, before we fill in the URL, I'll just go to our Analytics Manager. And what I'll have to do is add this Area Analytics to our Analytics Manager. And the way we're going to do that is we'll go to Areas to keep track of. We'll go to Areas to check periodically. And I'll add the Area Analytics. And what this means is that every, let's say, 10 seconds, we'll check if a player is inside this box. And if they are, we'll send that to this URL that we enter here. The other settings aren't really important to us right now. So let's fill in this URL. If you've never worked with Google Forms before, don't worry. You can go to Fax Analytics and have this handy little tutorial for how to use Google Forms. And we'll follow that right now. And I'll show this side by side. You can also check this box to see some example images. The first thing we'll do is go to forms.google.com. You'll need a Google account for this. We'll create a blank form. Give it whatever title. And we'll create a question. And let's call this the area where our players are. And we'll say this is the weird square. And we'll add another option for later, which we'll call elsewhere. Now this is our form completed. Now what we'll need to do next is to hit these three dots up here and click Get Prefilled Link. And that's what we'll enter into our URL field. Now we want the URL for our weird square. We'll hit Get Link. We'll hit Copy Link down here. And there's one last thing we need to do. We need to convert this URL. And you can see here how to make these changes manually. But we can also just paste this URL here, convert it, and there it is. You can see that it succeeded because at the end it says Submit, which is what we need. Now, all we do in the end is enter this URL right here. And there we go. Now, whenever a player enters this square, we should be able to track that they went there. Let's do one more thing though. We can go back to our Analytics Manager, and you can see we have a URL, player is between areas. Because right now we have this area for when players are here, but we wouldn't be able to know if players are anywhere else in our huge world. For example, if they were still at spawn. So that's what we had this elsewhere option for. Let's get the link for that as well. Let's copy it. Let's convert it in our Fax Analytics window again. And let's enter that into our Analytics Manager. There we go, now we're all set. Now just give me a minute to upload the world and we'll see if it worked. Now here we are inside the world. Inside the world, you're not going to get much feedback unless you open the log files after visiting your world. Now let's just stand in this weird square and check our Google form. Now the way to see if you're getting any responses is to go back to your original form and to go to the Responses tab. And you can see that we already have 2 responses. And you can see that we have 3 responses all inside the weird square. I'll just move outside the weird square. And if you remember, our box collider is just in this area. And if we go back, we can see that we are now elsewhere. And that's basically how to use this package. You can create as many areas as you want. Just remember that inside Unity, when you create one of these areas, that they probably shouldn't overlap, and that you'll need to enter them into these areas to check periodically. Now, one other thing you could do is add areas which are only triggered once. And what this might be useful for is checking whether players fall off your map, for example. Now, if a player were to touch this trigger, because it's entered in this area analytics right here, it would only get triggered once, and then we would know how often players, on average, fall off the map. And if they fall off again, it would be tracked. And of course, remember to change this frequency depending on the kind of world you're making. If you're making a huge world where players are unlikely to move often, or if you have a world with a lot of players, you might want to leave this value quite high. But if your world is small and doesn't see many visitors, it's okay to keep this at a low value to avoid missing areas which players visit. Now there's a bunch more options that you can use. For example, you could show users objects depending on the state of their connection. What you saw just now is everything working right away. However, for the system to work, untrusted URLs must be allowed. Otherwise, users won't be able to submit their data. And you could use these variables right here to show a specific game object when the system isn't ready or when there was an error to show a prompt. If you go into the Fax Analytics folder, you can see an example scene of the different things, or of the different things you could do with the prefab. For example, we have, of course, different areas right here. We have an area for a left side, a right side, an area for players who fell off, of course, just like I demonstrated. But there's 2 extra features. We have a button which players can press, and whenever the button is pressed, that is also logged, which is essentially the same as players falling off the map. And this doesn't use any extra prefabs. This is just a button that's included in the VRChat SDK 3, which is an interact toggle, and it toggles this area right here, which is enabled. It doesn't have a collider selected, which means that it's triggered as soon as it's enabled by the button, and then it automatically gets disabled as soon as the URL is sent. So players can press this repeatedly. And more interestingly, we have a Do You Like This World survey right here. And I'll just show that in-game right now. So right now, I have Allow Untrusted URLs on, which means if I go through this world, and for example, I go to this survey, everything will look normal in our Google form. I can say I like this world, and the frame rate is too low, and everything's just dandy. But if I turn off Untrusted URLs and rejoin the world, you can see that now, when I hit yes or no, instead I get an error message, which prompts me to allow untrusted URLs. And that's all possible just with the things I've shown you in this video. So now, if I hit retry or reconnect, nothing's going to happen at first. As soon as I allow untrusted URLs, it's going to show a connection message, and then I can select the option I want. And from now on, everything the user does inside the world is tracked. And that's how to use Fax Analytics. It's allowed me in one of my worlds to track a lot of useful data about users who visit my world. I'm using this system in one of my worlds called MindMatch, and there I use the survey system to track what features people want to see, and I can also track at how many players fall off the map. I hope this is useful to you. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Discord. Yeah, and don't forget to credit me in your world. I would really appreciate it. Bye-bye.